So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another new battle on the new test build. And speaking of new things, this is also the first map created by a player called Dabo, who is one of the defenders today. So another individual making their first foray into map creation. And it's going to be a cityscape style map, which I think is probably a good place to start if you're creating these maps. Obviously I'm completely ignorant of what it actually takes to make these and the time that goes into them. But a cityscape, you can allow the shape of the settlement to do a lot of the work for you, whereas a lot of some of the more involved map creation obviously involves stuff like structures and destructible features and the like, which is obviously a little bit more of an endeavour. So when you're first starting out these cityscape maps with especially these more natural terrain features, which are being used in lieu of walls, is often the way that you see things. And once again, seems to be a little bit of a theme with a lot of these. We are seeing the forces of good, which find their home on the eastern side of the Misty Mountains, taking up a defensive shape against the forces of evil on some of the more open plains that perhaps the Rhovanian has to offer, which is going to be one of the defending factions here today. Just a quick note on the settlement itself as well. I mean, there are some good defensive choke points to be had. The buildings offer a good amount of cover as well, and obviously there's some terrain features as well which can be useful, and as it is a 4v4 as well, all of these things do combine together to give the defenders a little bit more of an edge than they would have potentially in a 5v3 on less advantageous grounds, although it is a little bit open, more open perhaps than some cityscape maps do offer. But if you were going to have a pick between having an enclosed map or having better terrain, you'd probably pick better terrain every time, so the defenders will be probably quite happy with that in the grand scheme of things. A bridge is an interesting choice as well. We'll see if that actually comes into play later on, but yes, let's start off as we often do with the attacking forces, starting off with Medexa over here, playing as the Dominion of Isengard, a very well-balanced force among the evil forces of Middle-earth. They have some really good mid-tier options. As far as high-end options go, though, the Orcs are not wanting there either, especially when it comes to this kind of unit across all of them, really. Armour-piercing shock troops capable of dealing a lot of damage, though among them, the Nazkai perhaps are the standouts. They're pretty expensive, of course, but especially when you're facing off against armoured forces. Isengard's main body of their army anyway, at least in terms of melee forces, are more designed around efficiency. So for armor piercing damage spikes, you do need to invest a little bit more heavily if you want to get the very best out of them. The Nazkai, obviously, that is their MO. Uruk-hai archers as well. I mean, like I said, the map, especially in behind the initial fortifications, is a little bit more open, so the attackers may be fancying their chances in terms of a prolonged skirmishing battle. The Uruk-hai archers obviously are not the best at doing that, but they will at least offer the option if as the battle goes along. Of course, Isengard are much more well known at long range for utilising their crossbows. As we often say, when it comes to an attacking force against a defending one, if the attackers are able to deploy their crossbows effectively, that is very, very difficult for the defenders to come back from. Crossbows are very, very good with regards to their stopping power. There's not many kinds of units, if any really, that can efficiently take the damage they dish out. Obviously they do have lower range and they are a little bit more vulnerable to archers, but the Uruk-hai plate armour does help mitigate that somewhat against more basic archers. We shall see what the defenders have in store for them, though. Some hidden units, we'll have to wait and see what they are. The Guards of Orthanc, one of the other bodyguard units of Isengard, have far more defensive, of course, than the Nazkai. They will be better at taking all forms of damage, really. They have a shield, much better armour, though their ability to deal damage, especially against footbound units, is going to be far less because of that spear malice. But actually no, is this a bodyguard tier unit now? I've just noticed 162 men in the unit. That might be a little bit different from the last time we saw them. Rather intriguing. This puts them in kind of the same category as the Naruna Aru units, which once upon a time were bodyguards but got changed to be merely very high tier units. It gives Isengard a more numerous unit of spears that can be utilised. Of course, it does mean that individually they may not be quite as effective, but I think in the grand scheme of things that actually makes them more useful and a little bit more versatile. Uruk-hai pikes, of course, something which Isengard are very, very well known for. Always going to be the anchor to an Isengard line. The armour does mean they are pretty survivable, even when their formation is buckled a little bit and arrows are hitting them. It's still not ideal for them. But yeah, we shall wait and see how and when they get utilised, and of course ever their partners in crime are the Uruk-hai infantry. The shields obviously offer a little bit more cover when they're used in tandem with one another, and as far as a line infantry unit goes, they are also pretty damn good for their tier. A little bit more expensive perhaps than you'd be used to paying for an Orcish force, but worth every penny for the most part. If you do want to save a little bit of money, the Uruk-hai raiders are here as well, more numerous but obviously much more disposable, shall we say, and I'm sure that's how they will be utilised. Trolls of the White Hand. Trolls, of course, in this new version of the game are more useful than they were, which I think is a good thing, really, because the Trolls, as they were in the previous version of the game, were a little bit lackluster. We'll see how well they can do against the defenders here. And Champions of the White Hand, having fast movers out on these open plains will make it more difficult for the defenders to sally out, if indeed that was part of their plans anyway. Moving on, we have the Womb Raider, Ever Medexa's, Ever Medexa's partner in crime as well, you could suggest. They're often on the same team. Orcs the Misty Mountains, very, very numerous. They trade in some of the higher quality that Isengard have for numbers, but they do have more armour piercing at their low end, you would suggest, at least more at least more versatile armour piercing at their low end. Moria Spearguard, very numerous, and as far as this kind of unit goes, they're pretty efficient as well. You're not going to be winning many one-on-ones with them, but as part of a combined force, which is what you're going to have to use as the goblins, they can be a very important building block for that. The Misty Mountains also have access to crossbows as well. Unlike the Isengard ones, the armour is of lower quality, so of course they're a little bit easier to pick off, but in terms of their ability to deal damage, it's very, very similar, and that is the main aim of the game with crossbows after all. If they're brought forward early or later, as long as they're used effectively, that is one way in which the attackers can gain a real leg up in this kind of fight. Moria Halberdiers as well, very cheap once again. Again, armour-piercing phalanx for not a huge amount to be invested. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. We have Drake Broodlings as well. We've seen the Drake Broodlings used recently on what was apparently a desynced fight in the end, which is a little bit of a shame. But the Drake Broodlings, they can be used as living battering rams. They can really disorientate a defence if used at the right time. If used at the wrong time, however, they can be a pretty expensive waste of money. Black Uruks of the Mountains, not armour-piercing, but they do represent probably the most skillful, massable unit that the Misty Mountains have to offer. They won't be able to go toe-to-toe with the equivalent Elven or human units, really, but the numbers do help to offset that, and ultimately we have seen them be pretty darn effective in the past. We'll see if that's the case this time around, of course. When the defenders have access to the terrain they have, the Black Uruks would be one of the choices that you would choose to go after if you had your pick of the bunch in terms of ranged use for the defenders. White Uruk Fearmongers even more so though, because they are very, very dangerous in melee. They are the souped up version of the Moria Halberdiers in front of them in every way. Very dangerous, especially for heavily armoured factions because of the armour piercing damage that they can dish out. We have some Uruk Host as well, probably the closest thing that the Misty Mountains have in equivalency to the Uruk-hai infantry. Not quite as good as them, but they do represent a slightly more solid, higher end, mid-tier unit for their main line. And the Goblin Kingsguard are back here as well. A very dependable place to put your general, I should say, as a bodyguard, and that is the new general unit as well. Pretty numerous as well for this kind of unit also. Moving along, we've seen quite a lot of Rune, it seems, under the command of Hidden this time around. We've got some Lokflagrim, the armour-piercing line of unit as well, so a very efficient force, especially if you're facing off against armoured forces, which some of the defenders are, so we'll see how well they can be used there. Carmel's Immortals as well. Again, for their cost, if you can get them involved in melee without taking too much range damage because of the lack of a shield, they can be pretty efficient as well. But that's a big if, especially when you're on the attack like this. You can't pick and choose where the defenders use their ammunition after all, unless you can try and force them in some way. Scion Rim, a very, very dependable unit of high-end spears as well. Contrary to most of the rest of the Eastlings, they don't have the armour-piercing focus, less of the damage dealing, but very, very good defensive values. We have the Dragon's Wrath crossbows in and amongst here as well. A little bit different to the regular crossbows, potentially even higher damage, of course, but we shall see if that bears fruit or not with their specialty ammunition. Carmel's Chosen, similar to the Goblin Kingsguard that we've already seen, albeit probably, well, they have the same amount of numbers in their unit now. The Carmel's Chosen should be a little bit better individually, though probably comes with a little bit of an extra cost as well. Narim, more archers, of course, like I said, they could be useful for the reasons already outlined. We have the Golden Raiders, a unit of mounted crossbowmen, which was very rare in the previous version of the game. I imagine it's still pretty rare indeed. The Golden Raiders, though, mounted Eastron crossbows, fully upgraded with their armour. They're still going to have their fragility, but much like Javelin Cavalry, they can be used as very effective cavalry hunters. And also, unlike Horse Archers, I would suggest you can use them as just regular old crossbows come the late game. And that, of course, gives you yet another dangerous unit of crossbows to be utilised, the attackers not wanting for them. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, very, very high stats, of course, in terms of melee, a throwing projectile. Pretty expensive, again, another choice of unit which could be coming under arrow fire if the choice is the defenders to make. Balkoth Tribesmen as well for some basic javelins. And finally, on outriding on the flank, we have the Carmel's Dragon Guard, or Dragon Knights, I should say. Very, very good unit of heavy cataphract cavalry. Now then, finally, we have the forces of Mordor, played by Y2K86. Temple Executioners here with their black longswords, obviously a very, very strong unit of heavy swordsmen, and in terms of skill and finesse, this is the best bodyguard unit that we've seen from the attackers so far. Mordor have the most options in this regard of the factions that we've seen today, and as if on cue, here are the Nazgul, of course, individually speaking, one of, if not the strongest unit of standard infantry in the game, though of course there are only 13 of them. It is very, very possible to mob them if Mordor allow you to, and recently we've seen that not to be the case. Nazgul always embedded in other units, even if it's something as basic as these Orc Fodder, that can work, though the Orc Fodder themselves, of course, will fall away pretty quickly. Ablative armour for better units in melee. Numbers, they are spears, so they can be potentially dangerous to cavalry, but cavalry can still cycle charge them fairly easily. Blackguard of Barad-dûr here, another dangerous tool for the attackers to use. Mass pushing is, of course, still something which can be utilised effectively by the attackers, as it was in the previous version of the game. Morgul Chosen, similar to now presumably the Guards of Orthanc and the Scion Rim as they always were. High-end, heavy spears which represent a hard centre to any attacking force. Uruk Halberds, kind of similar to the Moria Halberds, though they have a little bit more about them individually than the Goblin ones. Same numbers, but the Uruk ones from Mordor a little bit more expensive, though nothing that will break the bank. Orc Maulers, cheap but cheerful, armour-piercing shock infantry as well. Again, more armour-piercing tools to be used, 2 units of them. Temple Guard, another armour-piercing unit, this is where the general is as well, going to be committed later, because of course they'll want to use all of their armour-piercing arrows launched courtesy of their steel bows if they are able. Moving elsewhere, we have the Orc Javelins, nice damage that can be done for them for a relatively small outlay. Morgul Chosen and Orc Fodder, the Troll Drummers, which now do function, so the low tier units will be given that little boost when the Troll Drummers are nearby, though I think that only applies to the Mordor units, it won't apply to his allies. And the Olag High are very similar to the Trolls of the White Hand that we've already seen. Now then, moving on to the defenders, all of the armour piercing we've seen from the attackers will be useful against Tommy's army here, playing as the Kingdom Under the Mountain, aka Erebor. Erebor, we've seen them, all of the times we've seen them in this new version of the game. They've been very impressive. We shall see if they can do so again, and also they will ensure that the attackers do not have a monopoly on crossbows. Indeed, if you look at the overall level of the crossbows involved, Erebor probably have the highest quality available to them. The Blacklock Engineers, I think they still have the body piercing, which is a very rare trait now. It was never as effective on the Blacklock Engineers because they require that perfect angle of firing. We'll see if he's able to do that here, but even if not, they're still just very brutal, very dangerous crossbows. 2 units of the standard Ironfoots as well. With the shields and armour, they can also withstand quite a lot of arrow fire. Makes them just that little bit more well-rounded than even the Isengard crossbows we saw on the other side. A unit which got the same treatment as presumably the Guards of Orthanc are the Sons of Durin. They were a bodyguard unit, now they're just a very high-end unit of infantry, which is kind of good because the Dwarves had too many bodyguard units in the last version of the game, I think. And it does open up another slot as well for the Dwarves to be able to bring more numerous units of infantry and give them a little bit more armour piercing up front, which the Sons of Durin definitely provide. Axe throwers are not armour piercing, though of course the damage they can deal is still very substantial, and given all the phalanx units that are on display for the attackers, albeit not the Gamp Brim by the looks of it, they do have plenty of really good targets, but axe throwers are pretty strong in the game, as we know. Ironfoot pikes, we've seen them every time Erebor have been in action as well. A shielded pike now as well, so they're going to be able to withstand the arrow fire that the attackers will be wanting to throw their way a little bit better, in addition to being very efficient units of regular pikes anyway. Several units of upgraded Ironfoot warriors. Basic Dwarven infantry is of course going to be a step above the dreck that the orcs tend to traffic in. Fairly expensive for what they are, perhaps, in comparison, but the quality is generally worth it, especially when you can dig in like Erebor can here, even if they do have a little ways to run. Hopefully the runic cavalry leaves them alone from their perspective. And the armour piercing of the Dragon Slayers, Mithryn, is also going to be useful against all of the attackers, really, though especially against Isengard and Mordor, I would suggest. Now then, the host today and the creator of the map is Dabo, and he's going to be playing as the Rhovanian, who mechanically, if nothing else, have proven to be a very popular addition. And I would agree, I think stylistically as well, I think they've done a pretty good job on these guys too. Tribal units, of course, represent the more numerous and perhaps more aggressive aspects of the Rhovanian force. The tribal levy spears are basic in terms of what they offer, perhaps wouldn't be out of place in some of the evil men factions in terms of the kind of unit that they are. Tribal berserkers, on the other hand, are perhaps something that you would expect to see, I should say, from a force like Rhudaur. This is where the melee damage dealing comes from the Rhovanian. It's really their only option for some significant damage spikes in melee. It's one of the things which does stick out about them. That doesn't make them any less effective at dealing damage, however, and it's the sort of unit which can wreak havoc among the orcish factions as well. Rhovican archers are a very good skirmishing archer, and the defenders may have to engage in a little bit of that, more than perhaps they would like, but that is often a conundrum that the defenders do face. We'll see how well they get on there. Tribal levy slingers, of course, and effectively a throwing projectile unit. They do damage not so quickly in terms of individual volleys, but over time it can really add up, and they've got plenty of ammunition to do that with as well. And I think, I'd be surprised, yes, tribal levy skirmishers, so the javelin variant of them is also here. Plenty of supporting tools, not a huge amount of outlay on these units either, but as the defenders you do need to make sure that they are efficient nonetheless. Another shielded pike, the Rhovican phalanx, which I think are actually a higher end pike than the Ironfoots even, or at the very least it's very close. Doesn't really matter. They're going to be doing the same sort of job anyway. The shield makes it a little bit easier for them to do said job. Several units of them. Rhovican hoplons are here as well, a more defensive unit. Of course, what sticks out by the Rhovican class of units is you don't have a standard line infantry unit variant. So you are going to have to use the hoplons as the standard infantry, which means you are subject to the spear malice, but you are also subject to the spear's ability to attack more quickly, which can lead to units getting staggered, which is what ultimately makes spears better on the defence, because it makes them harder to wear down. The best defence is a good offence, after all, in a manner of speaking, because the spear malice does blunt their ability to actually kill units doing that. And the Rhovican nobles here, we've seen more of these kind of units on the opposite side today, in form of, especially I think, the Carmel's Chosen. There's a few less of the Rhovican nobles, so individually they may be a little bit stronger, but again, the trade-offs and such mean that the units are probably very similar to one another in terms of what they offer. The other human faction on the defence today, or largely human faction, is going to be Dale. The Dalian Paladins, whoops, from the Warlord, because he has left them out, and this is not the unit you want to be leaving out in harm's way. I'm sure they will be hot-footing it back to the settlement. If there's no grace period, though, those Drake Broodlings will catch them, so we'll see if that proves to be a very foolish error from the Warlord or not, but let's see. Dalian Spearmen represent a rather basic, again, Spear Malice effective front line, but it comes with the upshots that spears have, as previously mentioned, several units of them. We also have the Barding Herd. We've seen plenty of halberdiers on the attack today. This is an example of the same sort of thing on the defence, albeit the Barding Herd are far more quality-centric than anything Mordor and the Misty Mountains have brought in this regard. The Gamprim would be closer, but even then the Barding Herd are still superior to them because of their better armour and of course the slight shield value they are afforded by wearing their shields on their backs. Blackshot Dragon Slayers are here, an armour-piercing archer for the defence as well, handheld wind lances rather than the steel bows that the fallen Númenóreans of Mordor have. Again, decent enough in melee as well. This weapon that they're wielding now is, I guess, the sort of thing that would be required if you were going to try and face a dragon. But it looks look out of place in the hands of some high-end Mordor orcs, that one. Bardian Marksman, another very good skirmishing archer. Same sort of thing with the Rhovican archers. They may not want to engage in a bogged-down skirmish fight with some of the lowlier archers that the attackers have, but they may not have a choice. But if nothing else, the Bardian Marksman and the Rhovican together will certainly have the beating in the long run of any of those units that the attackers have brought. More Barding Herd. Dalian Bowmen are kind of similar, a little bit less armoured, a little bit less efficient in that regard than the Bardian Marksman, but we shall see how that goes. River Patrol are here as well, shielded, javelins, all that good stuff. Laketown Pikemen are here also. Cheap pikes, but cheap pikes can be just as effective as long as you support them properly. Whether Dale have got the infantry numbers to be able to do that on their own remains to be seen. Barding Herd, of course, are a fellow Phalanx unit, so you can't really use them for that, but again, their allies can give them a hand there. And also, Adin Men over here does not have the ability to field a Phalanx of his own, because he's playing as Mirkwood, and that is a notable gap in their roster, but in everything else, Mirkwood are pretty effective when it comes to the quality of their units. Elder Pathfinders, previously Sindar of the Girdle, very, very good cavalry in terms of their aggression, and their abilities in melee against other cavalry slightly enhanced as well. Though unshielded, relatively lightly armoured, so it means once their hit points are gone, they can be easier to deal with, especially by enemy archers, so maybe a higher degree of difficulty in using them, but the payoff can be greater. Some hidden Wooden Realm Axemen just in front of them as well. We have the ever-popular Palace Guard in and amongst these units also. Armour upgraded, very, very good all-round unit, and they're fairly unique now as well, with the slight changes made to the Morroquendi over in Rhovanian. Heavy spears from the Hiri Ek. We have the Elder Council here offering some more javelins for the defenders, a couple units of them. Elven King's Guard are fairly far forward right from the off, but of course with their axes on their backs as well, that gives Mirkwood an armour-piercing option in melee, which outside of their bodyguard units they would otherwise not have. And then the Elder Royal Councillor here as well, Thranduil, rolling with his boys, and obviously Silverthorn arrows, which can be good for breaking up an advance, but it's a specific set of circumstances where they can be super effective. I don't think this battle will be that. I think it's just the pure damage they can dish out, which is going to be more important here. Other than that, the rest of the Mirkwood army would appear to be hidden, so I'm going to make a cut. It may be pretty short if the Dalian Paladins get clattered early by the Drake Broodlings and the Carmel's Dragon Knights, but I'm not sure that will be the case. But yes, we shall see, I suppose, and we shall rejoin when the battle is drawing its first blood. I'm not sure whether this was intended to be a little bit of a joke or not, but they were all shadowing this unit of Dalian Paladins as they moved backwards, and the champions of the White Hand, ironically enough, may have actually bitten off a little bit more than they can chew here, because as much as they can be very dangerous off the charge, you don't really want to be getting involved in a street fight against the Dalian Paladins when they're on foot, but they are going to escape. We may as well rejoin here as well, I suppose, given we have had the first action with one of the champions of the White Hand getting clobbered by one of those Dalian Paladins. I do apologise as well if I'm a little bit rusty. This is my first recording back from yet another trip away for work, which is obviously the way of things as it stands, but yes, this settlement, I mean, there are a few elements to this settlement which maybe are a little bit awkward for the defenders, in the sense that some of the better terrain is actually front-loaded on the front of the settlement, and as much as there is some raised terrain towards the back, this is a little bit more open, as we've already mentioned, which can be a little bit of a downside for them. I think we will have to go up to ×6 speed just for the time being, but I won't actually make any sort of cut here, seeing as we have already rejoined the fray. Meanwhile, at the front here, things are still a little bit open, but they're a little bit more constricting, so it's a little bit easier to control. But there's positions to take up on the ground level of the settlement to make a good defence more comprehensively. Perhaps make things a little bit more awkward than they could have been. But also, a lot of these structures mean that it does corral the attackers down certain routes, so there are actually fewer ways into the settlement than it may first appear. Rhovanian taking up position on this, the centrepiece castle, really, of this settlement. The dwarves are going to be able to get over here. The attackers will, of course, be able to hit from multiple angles, but a 4v4 does mean that they can't just unthinkingly throw themselves against these defensive positions. Bowman already taking up position as well. I mean, it is also worth saying that as the attackers are largely evil factions, completely evil factions, but largely orcish factions, the numbers they have at their disposal should be more than sufficient. It is interesting the way they're setting up though. The Misty Mountains here are going to be attacking from the front. It may look like there's only two ways in, but in reality, of course, there's only one because of the blocking effect that the structures are having. Over here, meanwhile, there are actually more ways in, so it does make sense that from this angle, both Mordor and Rune are going to be approaching a dangerous combination if ever there was one. But the Rovanian and Erebor equally as effective. Probably the two most effective factions we've seen in the new patch thus far, I would say. They've shown up more times than most, perhaps, but they've also shown themselves to be very adept on the defence and on the attack. their powers combined. Perhaps this will suffice. Mirkwood marshalling things over here against Isengard, which is a rather interesting matchup actually. Mirkwood of course have all the finesse and the skill, but Isengard's loading of mid-tier quality does mean that they can more efficiently deal with the kind of punishment that Mirkwood can dish out. Of course, no Orcish faction is going to be able to go toe-to-toe with the elves in terms of quality, and Mirkwood can carve their way through some of the lower tier stuff that Mordor and the Misty Mountains do tend to traffic in. 9-foot pikes on their way up. Erebor now into position, so you would suggest that the grace period should probably be coming to its end. Already the 9-foot axe thrower is in a rather intimidating looking position. Erebor making their way across to block any sort of runic advance. It is interesting actually that the axe throwers are the ones that are on the cliff's edge. Easier for enemy archers to try and skirmish them down, though perhaps the dwarven player is putting a lot of stock into those armour values and shield values. Mirkwood's still not taking the bait of Isengard being almost certainly within range, and it is also worth mentioning that there isn't a way into the settlement over here for Isengard. These are all completely locked off to them, so the only way to get in and around the back of the settlement is once again over here, so this does also lend itself to Mordor and Rune approaching from the side of the settlement. Misty Mountains and Isengard going to have to take a more measured approach. And there's the matter of all the cavalry, which the defenders won't really be sallying out, so I don't know how useful that cavalry is necessarily going to be. The only use it really would have seen is if that unit of Dalian Paladins was fair game, but in the end of course it wasn't. We'll come to Misty Mountains now. Is this going to be the beginning? Beginning of proceedings? I think it will be, so we will actually go down to 1 speed as a result. Still not taking the bait so far. I mean, Half-Orc Spearguard is not really worth taking the bait against them. Not dangerous enough to Mirkwood and melee to be worth worrying about. Other units in behind, however, most certainly will be. Mirkwood's missiles may be very, very strong, but they are also somewhat necessary to deal with strong phalanx units, and that's certainly the sort of thing that Isengard can boast. Carmel's Immortals. Interesting first choice of unit in. We did mention in the army composition phase that they have got a good amount of finesse to them in melee. But axe throwers, any sort of archer, exactly the sort of thing which can bring them crashing back down to earth with a thud. Taking up the initial positions here, and I like the way that they've set their stall out here. They're not just front loading on every single outer choke point, they're going to allow some ground so they can get some good crossfire. And the Rhovanian, most of the Rhovanian projectiles actually, the lower tier ones are the more damaging ones, and the higher tier ones here in the Rhovikin archers, yeah, they're still going to be more than capable of dishing out damage, especially if that damage is unanswered by the enemy. They are more designed to be that skirmishing archer to outblast the enemy. The attackers do have a little bit of that to their name in this battle, but again, if you look at the Rhovanian and Dale and what sort of heavy archers they can bring to bear, it wouldn't be too surprising to see the attackers not place too much stock in this sort of thing, although perhaps you could argue Mirkwood, even though the Uruk-hai archers of course stand absolutely no chance against any of Mirkwood's archers really. You could say that any sort of attacks they make are going to be more effective against Mirkwood because of their lower armour scores, though the Uruk-hai archers will melt away pretty quickly in the face of this kind of archer fire. Woodland Realm Patrol doing the business. Although the denser formation is probably not doing the elves any favours here either, but that is the first genuine two-way engagement we've seen in the battle so far. Misty Mountains, maybe unsurprisingly, are not too keen on heading into this area, but this is the hand they have been dealt. Dale with archers on both sides here, crossfire easily enough set up, and the spearmen waiting to block any advance from the initial goblin forays into enemy territory. Expo is furthest forward. Temple Guard coming forwards as well, so more pressure being put onto this bridge crossing. Bridges, of course, are a little bit more annoying to have to deal with. But Mordor perhaps identifying this as a good opportunity to gain some territory into the enemy's ranks. I mean, these Temple Guard are scything through this unit of Rhovikin Hoplons. It's not the most dangerous unit that the defenders have. Solid enough at holding a line, of course, but is it going to be worth it in the long run? Temple Guard could be very effectively used against some of the strongest units the defenders have, but perhaps just in an attempt to weaken and soften up this attack so that then infantry units can follow through. But that's only really going to be useful if they have the infantry to be able to do that. One unit of Orc Fodder certainly isn't. Even as weakened as the Hoplons are, they would still be successful, and there's plenty of Rhovanian units that can give them a hand. Some iron for pikes heading back here as well. Still the Misty Mountains, not quite yet ready to fully commit. The Dalians as well, easing up a little bit on the pressure, waiting until they can dump it all in one big go, I think, as the Misty Mountains have to commit at some point. I certainly can't blame them for taking the slower approach initially. I mean, this is a fairly long battle after all, so I imagine the attackers are going to take, at least initially, a more cautious approach, trying to gain small advantages initially, and then hopefully that can snowball for them when they do decide to commit in a big way. There may only be 36 of these Uruk-hai archers remaining. They can't really be left to their own devices. Both these units of Uruk-hai archers, Medexa again trying to win the efficiency battle, because they're not going to win the real battle against Adin Men's elves, at least not initially. But with ammunition supplies a little bit lower, and just with a few more dead archers, maybe Isengard's infantry column, when it moves forward, can have a higher level of success. Meanwhile, Rune are moving forwards as well. First out-and-out melee engagement here. Carmel's Immortals moving in, but Pikes backing up Ironfoot Warriors. A solid dwarven front line. Not going to yield much in the way of results, at least initially, but the Balkoth tribesmen are in a decent enough position to try and get some chip damage on those dwarves. Both sides trying to subtly manoeuvre just so. And for crossbows ready as well. The Iron for Axeros are in a bit of a weird position here. There's the one skirmisher I don't really understand the position of. I mean, I suppose it must be to try and sideswipe this runic unit. And that's as neat as they were able to make it. Orc Fodder still taking up the first positions for Y2K. Rhovanian with some tribal levy spears. Defense in depth is going to be difficult for the attackers to make any serious inroads quickly in this battle, which is maybe why they are taking the slower approach here. African archers firing across the way, hitting the Orc Maulers. I mean, the Orc Maulers certainly aren't the most dangerous unit, but any hit that lands, any arrow that finds its mark is likely to result in a dead Orc, and ultimately it is more armour piercing that you'll be depriving the enemy of. Armour piercing, which on this side of the battlefield at the very least will be pretty much universally useful, except for the tribal units, but Mirkwood are the ones that can counteract armour piercing the best as a faction on the whole, and they, for pretty much the entirety of the battle, will be Isengard's concern. Around patrol, taking a few losses, but not quite as many maybe as Medexa would have been hoping to inflict. And a column of melee orcs as a result are going to be making their way forwards. Uruk-hai raiders. Ooh, thinking better of it. Another unit of half-orc spear guard on the way forwards as well. I mean, solid enough, but when you do start to commit, the half-orc spear guard are going to merely be the first unit in. Again, that ablative armour in living form. Snaga skirmishers, meanwhile, trying to move forward to whittle down a bit of the strength of that Dalian front line. They've managed to get a few volleys off, but something has ripped through them, probably the alien bowmen, but this isn't really much use unless you can kill off the entire unit. If you leave the Snaga skirmishers thrown devices now, it will take them a long time. They will be able to dump their whole ammunition supply into this unit of alien spearmen if you allow this to continue. Loitering with malicious intent. Marvel's Immortals just about ready to start moving as well. Again, in melee terms, they'll keep themselves alive against the Ironfoot warriors for a fairly long period of time, relatively speaking. The opposite is also true. The Carmel's Immortals won't really have the damage to be able to crack through that dwarven armour too quickly. The issue that the Immortals may have is 1 or 2 volleys from those Ironfoot axe throwers will drastically reduce their numbers very, very quickly. Still a small matter of all of these crossbows as well. Crossbows, though, at least in terms of sheer numbers, is something which the attackers hold the advantage in. That may be the sort of thing which has an impact later on, but in these slightly more tentative opening bouts, not just yet, indeed that is the crossbows, and the Scion Rim are a worthy enough target. Not going to do damage to dwarves too quickly, but they will stay alive against them far longer than the vast majority of the Easterlings in the rest of the runic force. A few volleys from those crossbows will give the slightly wounded Ironfoot warriors at this point a fighting chance against them. A puncher's chance. Troll Drummer's on the way forward, but not a huge amount happening over here. I mean, the Orc Javelin's trying to do the same thing as the Snaga skirmishers, but meeting the same fate. I mean, they're right in front of those Rhovican archers. The Ironfoot axe throwers are there as well, should the need arise to give them a volley quickly. So the attacker's trying all of the classic skirmishing ploys, but the shape of the settlement so far is doing the defenders a fair amount of favours. Which is the idea, of course, as the defenders. You need to be able to use your defensive terrain to its maximum. Woodland Realm Patrol too close to the enemy now to go back into hiding. That is, of course, how Mirkwood can control a skirmish fight. They can choose when it starts, but not when the enemy is so close that you can no longer retreat back into your hide anywhere. Reforged Spearguard are there. Hiriek as well have a very dangerous initial front line to have to go up against. Still the Snaga skirmishers, slowly but surely they are having an impact on that unit of Dalian spearmen. And part of the issue here is it would be very tempting to go into melee to try to deal with them, but as soon as you do that, you're going to get mobbed by trolls and goblins. Though, this unit over here, these Moria halberds have been focused down as well. And the heavy goblin crossbows also, so Dale content to simply cripple the numbers of an individual unit. Like I said, the javelins are probably the worst ones you can do that against, though, because you're still giving them effectively their full effectiveness if you allow it to continue throughout the entirety of the fight. Dalian bowmen. How much ammunition Dale have? Probably still very much intact. Someone's chosen electing to retreat. I mean, doesn't do a huge amount of damage to those Ironfoot warriors, but it's very possible those Ironfoot axe throwers had an impact on that fight as well, given the relatively short length of it from our perspective. Going back for another bite of the cherry though. Why are we here? I mean, Rune steadily winning this fight. This one unit of Ironfoot warriors, after all, has been asked to take on a pretty hefty workload, and the addition of those higher tier spears mean that they don't have the quality advantage they would otherwise have. The numbers of the Balcroth tribesmen being added to the fight as well mean the pressure is going to get too much. I mean, one more unit would be enough to forcibly push this initial line out of the way, but that doesn't really matter too much. I mean, the dwarves have got plenty more that can be sent forward anyway, but just being able to efficiently deal with a single unit of infantry is the sort of thing which can add up as the fight goes on. Morgul Chosen loitering as well. Still no moves being made by Mordor over here in spite of the initial commitment of those armor-piercing arrows, but again, like I said, it would need to be followed through with a fairly hefty and all-in kind of attack. And perhaps this needs to be made in conjunction with other moves across the field. I mean, there are also Dragon Slayers back here. Mordor appear to have reshifted their focus as well. Going to move down through here, I think. Rune going to try and take the hill. Mordor twinning this with an attack on ground level. Misty Mountains, meanwhile, are moving forwards. And this is a fairly worrying scene for Dale. The Dalian Spearmen, as good as holding the line as they are not going to be very good against the snow trolls. We've already seen the increased effectiveness of trolls in these new patch previews across the last few months. And spears are not what you need to be dealing with them. What you need, ironically enough, are the Dalian Paladins, if you can spare them. But the numbers of the goblins here in conjunction with the trolls are going to be enough to cause real problems for this Dalian front line. And Dale don't really have too many excuses here. This is a very narrow section of the battlefield that they can devote their full attention to. Guardian Marksmen are going to be shooting into their backs, but using fire arrows maybe isn't the best of ideas. You're more likely to rout your own men, given the direction this fight appears to be going in. There's also still the supporting javelins and another unit of Snaga skirmishes, fresh Snaga skirmishes, so the damage is going to come in thicker bursts. Isengard creeping forwards as well against Snaga skirmishes. The Isengard variant trying to move forward, and any hits you get on the elves, of course, are going to be amplified by their smaller army size. Trolls once again as well, so it's over here in the slightly more constricted part of the map in terms of the options the attackers have, where they're actually making moves first and foremost. And again, Rune's task of trying to dislodge the dwarves from that hill over in the other corner, probably not all that appealing. Interesting that the Warlord is also sending forward late town pikemen. Low tier pikes are not really what you want for dealing with trolls either. You know, perhaps they will be good at holding their goblin support at arm's length. Need some more damaging infantry though. 22 snow trolls, and damage is still not really forthcoming. The Uruk coast as well, so I think the Misty Mountains do spy an opportunity here, sending forward some of their slightly more impressive units to try and hammer this home, because, I mean, if this position collapses, Mirkwood are going to be placed into a bit of an awkward spot. They can retreat still, but it's something they would rather not do. And this whole front section of the fortress becomes far more exposed if Dale fail to stop this gathering Misty Mountains momentum. Iriak, again, just nothing too severe. I think Isengard at this point, as long as they can just keep poking Mirkwood, even in a minor fashion like this, if they see Dale start to fold, that's when they can really start pushing forward as well, because then Mirkwood will have to deal with the foe they already knew was there, as well as a new one from the flank. Cardinals Immortals from hidden, not really making any significant inroads as yet. Axeros are here. Javelins raining down from on high. Ironfoot pikes pushing forward. Again, this is another part of the battlefield where the attackers continue to ratchet up the pressure. Rhovanian with some tribal levy spears, Uruk halberds, so some reinforcements were committed, but maybe they're going to need even more. I mean, this little fort on top of this hill is a very important cornerstone of this whole defence, I think, so it's not as if the dwarves can afford to really undersell themselves on this front line. They're going to need to commit reinforcements forward. I mean, Sons of Durin will certainly do the trick. It's the Uruk halberds which are proving to be a bit of a thorn in their side at the moment. The terrain being what it is, I don't think the pikes are really able to enforce their range advantage for now. But with some heavy damage coming in from the berserkers, Sons of Durin have actually stopped moving forward, but it doesn't matter because the berserkers will fill that role anyway. more damage. Morale becoming a little bit more questionable. Orc fodder. Rhovanian electing instead to defend around the corner. Perhaps wanting to avoid any sort of range damage, but again back to what could be seen as the most important engagement here, the Misty Mountains. Dale holding for now, and Isengard not wanting to be left behind by their allies, so to speak, and now going to move in. I mean, this will be a test of Isengard's credentials, going up against the kind of quality and damage that Mirkwood can chuck out. A bit of support coming in from the Uruk-hai archers, though not in bundles. Palace Guard are also close to the front line. The new look Guards of Orthanc, at least new numbers Guards of Orthanc, getting onto the front line as well. I mean, if nothing else, they will make the damage dealing potential of Mirkwood slightly lower. Looking around patrol. One of these trolls already bloodied. Bardian Marksman and Elder Council, the Elven King's Guard. What are they going after? Something over there. Perhaps Black Uruks? The trolls, I think, are trying to peel themselves off this front line now. I mean, this is going to be a lot of damage coming into this Isengard force all at once. And the numbers are not really in their favour enough, I think, for them to be considered overwhelming favourites for this. This may very well come down to whether or not the Misty Mountains are able to make good on their earlier promise. They're still steadily winning this fight, but Dale, at the very least, are delaying them enough to the point where Isengard may very well have jumped the gun just a little bit in terms of what would have been ideal timing. Mirkwood as well, their main concern would have been getting bullied by a phalanx, but that isn't going to be happening while their archers are still in close attendance, and Isengard are actually not sending forward their pikemen anyway, which is probably the right call, given the archers taking up the positions that they are. Meanwhile, still this line holds. 9-foot pikes holding down the front line.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Trolls moving forward again, so all of the trolls across the field really are being committed to these front line engagements, although I think for the Uruk-hai this is probably the worst one, purely because there are Sons of Durin and Tribal Berserkers in here, both of the kind of units with their damage that are going to be capable of doing a lot of damage to the trolls. I mean, the Uruk-hai are standouts among the trolls. A single unit of shock infantry is not going to be enough on its own to be able to stifle their flair, but 2 units of Sons of Durin, some crossbows and supporting units may very well be. They do kind of need this to pay off though, because this is a lot of resources that they're actually committing to this push now. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen on the way forward as well, but plenty of Gamprim, plenty of Flagrim. Tribal Berserkers. American Archers still silent for now. They don't really stand to gain too much if they attack from here with the resources they have at their disposal. There's not really enough. They're trying to do concentration of force here. Maybe that's fair enough. I mean, the positions the attackers are having to try and push their way through are disparate enough from one another that if they do win on one, there's still some way for them to go to reinforce their allies. It's really over here where that is slightly less the case. The Misty Mountains and Isengard will be able to give one another a hand, and the Misty Mountains are now getting through. I think the Drake Broodlings managed to barrel their way through as well, but they ended up routing as a result. I mean, going through pikes and halberds and enemy cavalry, they managed to get through, but it was at the cost of their continued presence on the field. Barding Herd moving in. It says victory seems certain for both sides, which I find difficult to believe. The Palace Guard against the Nazkai. Clash of the Titans, whether by accident or by design. These 2 units will face one another. Elven King's Guard with some more armor piercing as well. Silverthorn arrows are going to try and make it so Isengard can't simply bludgeon their way through this front line, and to be fair, the arrival of the Uruk-hai pikemen and the Nazkai have made a big difference. Isengard don't really have anything or much left beyond this. Neither will Mirkwood though. It could be rather inconclusive as a result of all of that.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
Elder Pathfinders. Black Oaks the Mountains as well. So Isengard and the Misty Mountains are managing to gain what they wanted from all of this. White Uruk, Fearmongers, Black Uruks, Misty Mountains maybe have slightly more left in the tank past this initial foray, but good news for the attackers ultimately. And like I said, this exposes a large swath of the settlement, although given the fact that Dale and Mirkwood are pretty much all in anyway, it's going to come down to some situational things, whether or not this ends up being effective or not. Champions of the White Hand, this is where cavalry can be very effective, of course, when the front lines start to buckle and you're able to start charging into units in these transitional phases. Elder Pathfinders and Dalian Paladins together, though, is something which maybe the Champions of the White Hand will want to avoid. Him Lung back here as well. Mordor starting to try and impact things over here. Arnheim Shadowbows, when did they use their ammunition? Don't know when, but Orc Fodder and Shadowbows nonetheless on the front line. Bit of a secondary engagement this, but it is a sign of intent that the attackers want to start pushing from as many angles as possible. Perhaps seeing their allies progress on the other side of the field has led them to this conclusion. Even if they end up losing some of the engagements, if they can win one or two, that will prove to be very, very key. The Uruk-hai have again wrought their havoc on this front line, but not to the extent where it's allowed the attackers a definitive edge. Rhovican nobles in here. The front line is still intact after all. The trolls are the only ones that have really managed to push their way through. The dwarves with a little bit of backup from the nobility of the Rhovanian. Moving in, Sons of Durin. I mean, the Temple Executioners are in here now as well, so it's not as if this attack is going anywhere anytime soon, but it's not a disaster for the defenders either. And then the secondary assault as well, but it's only one unit of Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, so again, a bit of a footnote engagement. But situation still just fine. Blackshot Dragon Slayer, so this is where the second layers of the defence will start to earn their salt. Hot Plons, setting up secondary defensive lines. That Dalian line, to be fair, it lasted longer than I thought it would, but it was always doomed to failure based on its composition. And to be fair, Isengard were actually gaining ground against Mirkwood before that happened, but as soon as the Misty Mountains broke through, it was always inevitable that the front line of Mirkwood, a little bit of support from Dale as well, was always doomed to failure. But Dalian Bowmen over here, so cut off from their allies as they are. We'll see how much they can still contribute. Dale and Mirkwood managing to get back into shape. Elder Royal Council, of course, the only way to get to that section over there is to take the long route round, so they are safe, but they also have a long way to go before they can regroup with their allies. The question of what to do over here is now a very real one as well, because in order to keep fighting over on these front lines, the Rhovanian and Erebor, which so far have proven to be efficient for them, they are going to need to commit units to their rear as well to stop the Misty Mountains from attacking them. Can they divide their attention that much? Do Rune and Mordor still have enough numbers to be able to punish them for doing that? Or do they simply try and retreat? Is retreat even an option anymore? They may have already committed to this line of thought. Defeat is a distinct possibility for all of these halberdiers, tribal berserkers. How much damage they will have done, we'll have to wait until the in-game splash screen. We are watching from the perspective of the Rhovanian after all. Nobles. Golden Raiders are also in and amongst things now as well, but rather than using their crossbows on horseback as they would want, they're getting in and amongst Ironfoot warriors, which is not ideal for them, but merely trying to induce a bit of pandemonium on the field, perhaps. Which they are kind of succeeding in, because those hoplons are peeling themselves off the front line against the guildsmen, which I wouldn't have recommended. Also, these Rhovikin archers now having to turn around and start firing volleys into the advancing Misty Mountains forces as they make their way through the streets. Over here, victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Snaga skirmishers on the advance, although it looks like they've got their weapons drawn. I mean, that's also something worth mentioning, is the Snaga skirmishers, certainly the second unit, will have been very happy with what they were able to achieve, and also the Wound Raider again with these depleted skirmishers which are not being finished off. This is what is affording the Misty Mountains a really good amount of efficiency as they continue to make their way through the settlement. Heavy Goblin crossbows doing their thing. Warrior Spear Guard. Urukai Pikemen as well. Isengard looking a little bit thin on the ground now, but it all would have been worth it. I think Isengard would have taken this at the start of the battle. They still have enough left to the point where they can be a fairly effective fighting force. And Mirkwood, there goes the Rhovanian general. It's interesting. The Rhovikin nobles fighting on the front line, the Dragon Knights being committed to what is largely a choke point engagement, having some success as well. I mean, most of the Rhovikin nobles unit is still okay, but one swing of the Cataphract's sword, enough to bring the Rhovanian chief down. Sapphire Bladesman moving forwards as well, in behind enemy lines, still holding the guildsmen at bay, but territory-wise the attackers are starting to gain the upper hand over here as well, so trying to divide their attention this heavily probably hasn't been to their advantage. You can see here tribal berserkers and Rhovanian phalanx as well, overwhelmed as a result of trying to split down too many paths. Blacker to the mountains, whiter at fearmongers, all doing the business. Worrying times for the defenders when the morale is, or the momentum is so clearly shifting against you. Morale, ironically enough, is one of the ways in which that could turn around yet again, given the state of affairs with regards to some of the rank and file of the Misty Mountains and Mordor. Warrior Spear Guard still doing their thing. Tribal Levy skirmishers haven't really seen a huge amount of the throwing projectiles from the Rhovanians. I don't know whether that's just sheer chance or not. But the final stand, back here, this raised plateau, as it is going to be, we shall see if this is effective enough ground for them. The rest, meanwhile, is just going to be clean up for the attackers. How efficiently can they deal with the fighting forces that remain? Carmel's chosen making their way up the hill. Time for axe throwers being engaged in melee. I mean, considering the amount of throwing projectiles that are on the field, the Snaga skirmishers are really the only ones that we've had the chance to see. It may very well be the defenders have been utilising them well enough and we have simply missed them. It would not be too surprising. But Rune, in spite of the initial setbacks they were suffering, they'll be fairly happy with this as well. Shadowbow's still alive, Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen still have their cavalry. High tier units like the Sapphire Bladesman and Carmel's Chosen as well. Still a few of the Rhovikin nobles fighting to the bitter end. And without their general, they still soldier on. Calling raiders. Kamul and his chosen. Really like the redesign on that unit. 5-foot warriors, I mean, there are still a few stragglers here and there as a result of the forward momentum that the attackers had meant that some of these guys got left behind. Bladesmen, I mean, I don't know if they've used their ammunition either. Another example of a throwing projectile unit which we didn't really get to see if they used their payload or not. Shadowbows still have ammunition though, of that there can be no doubt. Taking shelter behind their newly conquered fort. You know, I think now it's just a case of stacking up for the attackers and pushing through. They can only really attack from one, well, there are technically 3 angles. This one, however, they will have to wade through an awful lot of punishment, especially at the hands of something like the Elder Royal Council. If they want to go this way, Mordor, of course, do already have a potential attacking force to go the route across the bridge. But the bulk, you would imagine, is going to be coming up through the middle. Warriors, 17 of them still standing, still swinging. Impressive enough. Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. I think it would take more than a fool. Rim as well. How much ammunition the attackers have left is another question, because that's how you can really take advantage of the open space that the rear of this particular settlement affords you as the attackers. That is the downside to this position. The choke points are decent enough, and you can still set up a little bit of crossfire, although to do so to its most effective is something which the attackers are already trying to prevent. Rim going after the Blacklock engineers, though Blacklock's pretty damn resilient against this kind of force. Rovikin archers. Back and forth. That is the kind of fight that the Rovikin archers are good at, I suppose. Is that going to be enough? I mean, there's a bit of a lull in proceedings here. I think this is mostly down to the fact that the attackers are going to have to reposition their entire armies so that they're ready to make their move. I mean, Rune, I think, are going to be a very central cornerstone to whatever assaults the attackers intend to lay on. Rim still firing away with their fiery projectiles. Rovikin archers still content to fire. Going after the Gap Rim as well, they're not really engaging in that back and forth. Trying to take away some of the more vulnerable and some of the more potentially dangerous units as the battle goes on. Late game phalanx units, always a potential problem. But they're celebrating among the attacking units there. I mean, Uruk-hai archers at the base, Moria spear guard setting up in position. Are Isengard going to try and take that long route around? I mean, Blackshot Dragon Slayers and Elder Royal Councillor over there, I wouldn't recommend it. Interesting as well to see in this particular battle no artillery. Artillery has been a real fixture in some of these new patch previews that we've seen more recently. Strange indeed. And then still these fiery shots. Blacklock engineers, I should say. Not dying with any regularity though. To the surprise of no one, I would suggest. Rhovican archers. Hoplons as well. Uruk-hai archers. I mean, to be fair, the Uruk-hai archers have been involved in this battle since its very earliest stages, and they're still getting use out of them. Much like the Misty Mountains, Isengard are able to use their battered and bruised projectiles for an extended period, and those little things do tend to add up. Some heavily depleted Misty Mountains units are making their way over here. This is a token force, if ever I saw one, something you can cobble together from your heavily wounded units. Very depleted Isengard spears. The same from the Misty Mountains, with a few extra classes of infantry as well. So all out here. Rhovican hoplons, which presumably returned from routing, getting hunted down by the Dragon Knights on the outer edges of the field. Kind of unfortunate that the hoplons routed that way, I suppose, and most unfortunate as well that Hidden was on the ball with his Dragon Knights to make sure that they couldn't be a nuisance later on. We have seen battles decided by smaller margins than that in the past. Whether this will be such a case, I'm not sure. I think if we take stock of the situation here, the defenders are down by 3%. A lot of quality has been used by the attackers already, however. The position is decent, so in those terms you could argue it's still pretty darn even. There's still stuff like paladins and some really strong units for the defenders as well. In terms of sheer numbers, Rune and the Rhovanian are the two main players still involved. I'm entirely certain what Rune, on the other hand, are waiting for. Lots of these units were just sort of languishing outside of the settlement, and now we're having to wait for them to make their way in. Rhovican hoplons. Looping a few shots overhead. Heavy slingers as well. Haven't really seen a huge amount from the slingers in this battle yet either, but if they've managed to save all of their ammunition supply for now, trying to guard the final stand, maybe that can be a big difference, making the Misty Mountains sending over a little bit more now, as well as Isengard, so the intent is there, and that is going to be a bit grisly. Fodder, Ardenheim shadow bows, do they still have ammunition? Looks like they do. It's going to be a real shame. Rhovican phalanx. Pointing the wrong way, so even their shields won't be coming into effect here, though their armour will be. Uruk-hai archers. Again, this has been a real lull in the middle of this battle, and I think most of it has to do with Rune dragging their heels a fair amount. There's no real need for those units to be that far away and to take that route into the settlement, but it is what it is. Shadow bows. I mean, still the attackers are intent on doing the soften the enemy up before advancing, which is still the smart thing to do. Any sort of ammunition that can be expended as well before any sort of commitment is made. I mean, Bardian Marksman, are they going after the crossbows or the pikes? Either one would be an acceptable target. Oh, neither. They're going after the Blackback Mountain Berserkers. A very acceptable target. The defenders are to win this after all. They will need to have a complete quality advantage. Urukai archers. Dragon Slayers. It's interesting to see their new weapon. I mean, if people were hoping to see the Blackshot Dragon Slayers be given maybe a more practical weapon, I'm not entirely sure whether this is any better or worse than the Guts-style Dragon Slayer sword that they had last time around. I mean, you can, in a fantasy sense, I suppose, if you're going to slay a dragon, you do need a weapon of some heft. Guards of Orthanc. Archers. Still, the Ardnheim Shadow Bows doing their thing. Tribal Levy Slingers, though, as well. Ardnheim Shadow Bows do have good defensive stats for Rangers. Very good all-round unit now, actually. Given the changes to Rangers, the Ardnheim Shadow Bows were always probably my pick of the bunch because of their defensive prowess. And even with the drastic mechanical change that Rangers have suffered, I guess you would say, they would still be my personal pick. Elder Pathfinders, useful at helping to blunt the Drake Broodlings earlier on, but perhaps their slightly more lightweight nature is now proving to be more of a concern. Golden Raiders moving forwards as well. I mean, we're well within the final 10k frames now, so I imagine once this attack gets underway, it's going to be a fairly quick and brutal affair. Golden Raiders are not going to enjoy being in melee against the Elder Pathfinders. Urukai archers. River Patrol as well. Another throwing projectile unit. Meanwhile, Rune are still at a snail's pace, getting the rest of their units in. Once again, hiding. How apt. Hits being sustained by the Tribal Levy Slingers, but that won't be too concerning for them. You can see here, though, the consistent amount of damage that the Slingers are able to do. The Shadow Bows were having things their own way until not too long ago, but that is certainly no longer the case. Flaming Shots being utilised as well. Archers. Being used as the ablative armour frontline once again. I mean, their armour scores will help them, but as if on cue, they face a unit with armour piercing, as lowly as the Orc Maulers may be. Again, Hoplons. Again, this is a good opportunity for the attackers to overwhelm a small chunk of defenders. Once again, taking these efficient engagements, which the attackers so far in this battle have been very good at doing. To their great credit. Tribal Levy Slingers. firing in. Juicy for the slingers as well, to be fair, and the Rhovikin phalanx moving forward. Already shaken though, that's a little bit concerning for the Rhovanian. Perhaps the early loss of their general will have an impact on their ability moving forward, considering they are the cornerstone behind this final defence. Plenty of pikes though. That is one reason why the attackers will kind of need to have some projectiles still available to them. River Patrol. First one's in against the Moria Spear Guard. As much as neither of them are really the last word in terms of quality, the Spear Guard are at least a dedicated infantry unit. High crossbows, so I think now we're going to start to see the pressure ratcheted up, and this is where we'll see if the quality and position of the defenders can outmatch the numbers and the momentum of the attackers, although momentum is maybe the wrong word for it. The advantage that they've built up until now, momentum was somewhat stifled by the rather lengthy absence of action in proceedings. Landing a few of those fiery projectiles still overhead. Tribal Levy Slingers, Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, so we are seeing more thrown projectiles now. Slingers, again, the sheer density of the projectiles that they utilise is another reason why they can be so effective. Carmel's chosen moving forward, the phalanx as well being used to brutal effect. There's only one Olang High remaining. They were very effective against the front line earlier, but trolls, they are a more effective version of what they once were, but they are ultimately still a limited resource to be spent. As soon as they start to fall away, well, those Silverthorn arrows trying to make it more difficult for this front line to be reinforced, and now the River Patrol are not the only ones on the front line. Indeed, it will be the Dalian Paladins who, depending on your point of view, you could say are quite lucky to have had a part to play in this battle at all, but I think for the sake of it being a competitive affair, this is probably for the best. Still behind, Goblin Kingsguard also on the way forward. They've taken a little bit of damage, but then the Misty Mountains did have to exert themselves earlier on to gain the position that the attackers were able to get. Meanwhile, fodder, not a huge amount of emphasis being put on this defence. Indeed, the attackers just allowed to wander right on in. If that had been the Temple Guard doing that, then they might be in real trouble here, the defenders. As it is, they may very well be able to get rid of this Orc fodder. There goes a general. I think that may be the Dwarven general as well, ironically at the hands of the Orc fodder. But I think they will rout, but the Shadowbows, and there's still the small matter of the Temple Guard on the way across. The Blacklocks will be getting in position to line them up and knock them down before they can get into melee in their full glory. Two defending generals gone there. Based on the mini-map as well, that's a lot of red. It is a little bit misleading, but it is a situation in which the expected outcome from here would be an attacker victory based on everything we've seen of Reforged over the many battles we've witnessed. Hiri Lung, Lancer Forces is evenly matched. Again, that sort of expertise in melee, maulers, all chosen, all going to be very effective. Crossbows close to the action, not really able to get into a position to support. I mean, very quickly there the Mordor general falls at the hands of the Dragon Slayers, and the Temple Guard are no slouches, so that is an impressive and quick return on that investment of dwarven quality. Dragon's Wrath crossbows. The fact that these crossbows are now getting into position, we said, and the attackers can get crossbows into a place like this when they already have a bit of an edge in the battle, it's going to be difficult for the defenders, because it's not the sort of damage you can afford to sustain, even if you have the advantage going into a situation like this. But the defenders had some work to do. Unfortunately for them, they're now going to have to try and find a way to deal with those crossbows pretty damn quick. Drummers, keeping Mordor pointing in the right direction. Those Temple Guard got ripped apart very quickly. I mean, yes, they did take a couple of hits from the Blacklocks on the way, but you'd still expect them to put up a little bit of a better fight, even if the Dragon Slayers are one of the scarier units of their type in the game. Perhaps the scariest if you call it shielded infantry units that also have armor piercing. They may very well be the very best of that. Guards of Khazad-dûm may have something to say about that, but they are very, very similar. Meanwhile, mass now being employed. The attackers clearly smell blood in the water. Now attempting to rend the defenders apart. Lan still sturdy enough, but the rest of the line starting to fall away, and now cavalry's running around. Champions of the White Hand, Campbell's Dragon Knights. This is looking like it's only going to end one way at this stage. It's actually very close in terms of the amount of numbers, and clearly the percentages are still very close indeed. Actually, at some point in time, the defenders did actually take the lead in terms of the sheer percentages. Maybe then not all is lost, but the cavalry being in behind enemy lines is a problem. And the crossbows being able to shoot is also a problem. There goes the Dalian General, yet another defending general as well, which is going to be enough for the likes of the River Patrol to consider routing when the going gets tough here. So it is very, very close in terms of percentages, but it's one of those weird situations where really the attackers, I think, have played this very, very well. Much as I may complain about the dead spot of action in the middle of the game, ultimately that wasn't to any great benefit or detriment to anyone involved. The defenders, meanwhile, again, the construction of those Dalian front lines, Mirkwood, maybe not sensing the danger they were in quickly enough. That side of the battlefield was where things started to go awry for them, because that was when the Rhovanian had to turn some of their units around to meet the challenge at the Misty Mountains, and as a result, almost immediately, to give credit to Rune and Mordor, they seized upon it and started to turn up their own pressure. And that was a series of events I don't think the defenders ever properly recovered from in this one. Victory a distinct possibility for the River Patrol? I don't think so, yeah, defeat of the Royal Council. Victory seems certain. Slingers also being engaged in melee. Doing decently enough for now against the remnants of Orc Maulers and Shadow Bows, but greater foes will be to come. Campbell's Dragon Knights doing their thing. The Dragon Knights have been a surprisingly effective force in this battle, and not necessarily in a traditional cavalry role. I mean, here they're able to get a little bit of a head of speed, but maybe a more traditional cataphract role is actually what they've been playing when they bludgeoned through earlier on and managed to kill the Rhovanian general, being used in a more aggressive manner than cavalry is often used, and they've been effective in that role. They definitely need to avoid those pikes though. RHUNEN firing in. River Patrol are shaken. I'm surprised they've lasted this long actually. They're being overwhelmed in melee and being hit by flaming projectiles. And the general recently died, so credit to the men of the Celdwin. But this is most assuredly their end. Especially with some cavalry charges coming in as well. Only 5 remained before they broke and fought to the death. Troll drummers. Still very much alive as well, so clean up now. Now it flipped back the other way pretty quickly. You could see the exact moment really the defenders fell off that cliff. Those Dragon Knights clattering into the Dragon Slayers. You've had a very impressive final phase of the battle, but it was always a big ask for them. The Rhovanian are gone. Front loading as they had to perhaps here in the final stages, but it does also mean that while they were the healthiest going into this final stand, they're also not the last ones left. One Troll of the White Hand still lives. Green Lung still here. Palace Guard were, I think, killed off in that Isengard advance earlier on, which is another tragic loss. They were only really committed actually when things started to go a little bit wrong for the defenders, so that is maybe another judgment call that could have been a little bit different. Really, we're picking at things here with regards to what the defenders did wrong. This was a situation where I think the attackers deserve a lot of credit for how they approach things, and it's a rather, when you look at it, it's obviously a cityscape battle, and these are something that all of these players have played on many a times before, but the layout is a little bit peculiar. It takes a little bit of consideration before you simply unthinkingly charge into it. And there were a few pitfalls that could have happened. There are a few really good opportunities for crossfire for the defenders. Due to a combination of factors, the attackers never had to suffer from that too badly. You're always going to have to take some damage on the chin, but it wasn't to the extent that it cost them. And there we go. This town on the plains, I'm sure there is such a town in some part of the Rhovanian that this can be attributed to. But it does fall into evil's hands. Narrowly. But that is the outcome nonetheless. Is it the Dalian Paladins that are ironically the ones still left? Yes, there's one Dalian Paladin that remains.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must have his men avenge him.
I think that was Thranduil as well, dying at the same time as the final Paladin. And there we have it. Attacker victory. And a big thank you to Dabo for sending this one in before we get on to anything else. This was his first map after all, and it's always good when someone else starts to get involved in map creation like this. It does tend to be a little bit of a sort of revolving door really. There's always new people that come in to replace the ones that maybe do have less time to be able to create these sorts of things. So it's always good when someone new enters the fray. So big thank you to him, and big thank you to you for sending me this battle replay as well. There is another one that was sent, although I'm not sure I'll be able to do that one because there has been a recent update to Reforged. There is like a new version of the test build which people are migrating to now, which that replay was not on. I don't know if I can make that work with the assets folders. I might be able to. It is a dwarven one, I think, on one of the gates of Khazad-dûm, so that'll be interesting. So if I can make that work, I will. If not, I'll let them know, and I'm sure that I think the idea would then be to rerun it. So we will see it at some point, whether it's on this variant of the test build or whether it's on the slightly changed version of the test build with a few tweaks. We shall see. But yeah, as far as this battle goes, obviously more kills to the defenders generally. Perhaps you could say a disappointing return from Mirkwood, getting the lowest amount of kills by some distance on their units, and it's not as if they were going up against a small army either. Medexa's more Isengard force, over 3,000 men. You need to get more than 2,100. I don't put too much stock in kill counts usually, but when you see this kind of return, usually the reason I don't put stock in kill counts is because the elves have got a vastly inflated kill count because of the focus of their armies and often the nature of their opponents against them. But this is a bit stark because it is contrary to what we would usually see. Indeed, Isengard got nearly as many kills as the elves, despite having nearly double the numbers at their side. So a little bit unfortunate there. Mordor getting some good kills, like I said, the Misty Mountains. The momentum really started to shift in the battle when the Misty Mountains started to gain the upper hand against Dale, which the Misty Mountains did play well. I mean, one thing that you would say for the defenders is Dale probably should have constructed that front line a little bit better. Spears and pikes alone not going to be sufficient when you start dealing with trolls and aggressive infantry. You need your own aggression for that. And if Dale weren't capable of satisfying that, then maybe Mirkwood should have taken the initiative and the Hiri Lung should have gone over there. But again, ifs, ands, buts and maybes. Yeah, I think mostly the attackers won this battle through their own good work, so I think they deserve more the credit rather than the criticism for the defenders. As far as what did the damage for the Rhovanian force, like we said, I mean, let's have a look. Rhovikin nobles, they were committed to a fight that was already slightly going south, and they are a more defensive bodyguard unit as well, so numbers of kills are not really the main thing for them. Again, the skirmishes and the slingers, we've often seen them be very impressive, and that is once again the case here. Rhovikin archers also, though much of their damage was also unanswered until the later stages, and even then they were going after more vulnerable units. Tribal berserkers, mixed fortunes in melee, but all of them at least breaking 100 kills, and one of them breaking 200, which is exactly what you want to be seeing. So nothing too out of the ordinary here, pretty much standard fare for what you would expect from the Rhovanian, at least in terms of proportions of kills, numbers, maybe a little bit skewed here and there. I mean, getting nearly 400 kills on slingers is very impressive. So I did mention in the midpoint of the battle that throwing projectiles maybe hadn't been as much of a factor as I thought they would have been, but by the end the Rhovanian did make it far closer as a result of the use of those slingers. But yeah, big thank you to Dabo, like I said, for creating this map, getting involved, and sending me this battle replay as well. Big thanks to all the players as well, plenty of familiar names here for being a part of this battle replay. And as I mentioned, hopefully we'll get another new patch preview on this one. We will do another one from the old version of the game as well, which is kind of a bit nostalgic as far as a setup for a battle goes. So those will likely be the next two out, and following on from that, of course, who knows. Like, I do have a tendency to make my way through my backlog pretty damn quickly these days as a result of replays being sent in a little bit more slowly because of the varying versions of the new patch, and of course when people are working on the new patch they only want to send me battle replays that are good. So perhaps it's a good thing that I've rejigged my schedule to only really be one video a week, outside of a few additional videos here and there, purely because I wouldn't have enough to do 2 videos a week now based on how things are going with regards to the old replay production. But yes, regardless of that, we shall see what transpires in the coming weeks. I hope you enjoyed this.